Question 14. Why do Blacks need communities instead of neighborhoods? Physical communities and a strong sense of a community are essentials for surviving and prospering in a competitive, group-based society. Today, across America, Blacks have neighborhoods instead of communities. A community is where a group lives, works, learns, competes, and thrives. It is where they store their valuables, history, culture, businesses, jobs, and functional schools. Black neighborhoods are like buckets with holes in them. They are porous and do not hold in things of value. A neighborhood is dysfunctional, crime-ridden, impoverished, and transitory in nature. As world societies become increasingly more competitive and nationalistic for the survival of Black America as a group, it must also become competitive by building functional communities. When the first European immigrants entered this country, one of the first things they did was build their respective ethnic communities within which they lived, worked, learned, competed, and thrived. As the integration movement of the 1950 seconds emerged, white ethnics became fearful that Blacks would move into their small ethnic communities and overwhelm them. So, they rallied around their strength, their greatest commonality, which was not ethnicity, it was their skin color. They sought to strengthen themselves against Blacks in social integration by abandoning their separate ethnic communities and assimilating into a larger group, the national community of oneness and whiteness. Then, as a national community, they were able to protect themselves from Black Americans' march towards social integration and a colorblind society. Just like European whites surrendered their ethnicity, came together and built a national white community, Black Americans could come together for group strength as a national Black community and cease pursuing social integration. However, to convert neighborhoods into communities and bring back Blacks who no longer live in Black neighborhoods, the targeted areas must have certain things. Community Tree of Life, Source, Powernomics Corporation of America. Incorporated like a tree, a community must have healthy roots to survive, compete, and prosper. The following are the key elements that a community must have. 1. Support of those who do not live there but identify with and support the physical community. 2. An alternative, wholly independent business district that produces goods, services, wealth, jobs, and business opportunities for its own residents and supporters. 3. A unifying code of conduct that conditions residents to protect, respect, care for, buy from, and support members of their own community. 4. A form of governance with public officials or community representatives who advocate for and defend the collective interests of the community once it is established. And most importantly, 5. A functional Black community must be marked and identified with distinctive signs to denote that it is valuable and closed to destructive activities such as drugs, prostitution, and garbage dumping. Marking a community occurs when towns, buildings, street signs, expressways, airports, parks, and public statues are named to reflect the community residents and their culture. Before the integration process began in the 1950 seconds, Blacks had notable towns and quasi-communities, which, if nurtured instead of destroyed, could have become functional communities. There was Harlem in New York, Black Bottom in Detroit, Watts in Los Angeles, Sweet Auburn in Atlanta, and many more throughout the country. Within those communities, Blacks operated businesses, schools, churches, and social organizations. They stored wealth, culture artifacts, jobs, history, political capital, business opportunities, spiritual values, middle-class values, and produced Black leaders. Blacks patronized, cared for, and worked with their own people. Jim Crow segregation had a positive side for Blacks. It provided a nurturing place for their quasi-communities and the businesses, culture, and other institutions stored inside. They were not perfect, but these quasi-communities were valuable and were at a midway point in development. De jure laws forced Blacks to have a sense of oneness and an internal cohesiveness. It was during segregation that Black businesses and industries bloomed across this nation. 100 years ago, during Jim Crow segregation, Blacks reportedly owned 10 times more businesses than they own today. Social integration stripped Black communities and removed the physical places where all classes of Blacks could live and work together, whether they were doctors, teachers, bus drivers, business owners, lawyers, or janitors. Today, Blacks do not have the role models next door, business ownership, the jobs those businesses produced for their own people, and they are no longer in control of their culture because they no longer have communities, or a sense of community. In such a state, it is difficult, if not impossible, for Black Americans to communicate, organize, and compete as a team. Racism is a team sport, and competing in a race-based society must be a team effort built around a group's strong self-interest and need for self-preservation. Unlike Black Americans, non-white ethnic immigrants see the value of coming together as a group and do not pursue the scattering integration process. They know there is strength and camaraderie in numbers. Instead, newly arriving immigrants aggressively seek out their compatriots, old friends, and families to form social and commercial networks. Their ethnic enclaves become culturally protected markets from which they draw business financing, a skills bank, and a consumer support group. An ethnic enclave or physical community gives a group a primary area in which to aggregate their businesses, cultural products, and employment opportunities. As an example, when Vietnamese refugees arrived in the U.S., the federal government, in an effort to encourage social integration, physically scattered the Vietnamese immigrants in settlements throughout the country. It was difficult for the Vietnamese to adjust and assimilate as a new minority in a majority white society. According to Richard T. Schaefer's book, Racial and Ethnic Groups, the U.S. government's attempt to socially integrate the Vietnamese refugees failed because the refugees sought out their compatriots and reunited, built their own communities, and once again established a sense of community they had in their home country. Where individual Vietnamese lived outside of a Vietnamese physical community, their sense of community energized them to commute long distances to support and purchase products from Vietnamese-owned businesses and maintain social and religious connections. Their communities gave them a place to grow and gain strength. The second and third generations may assimilate into whiteness, but they gain strength from and remain connected to their group. Residential areas in which Blacks are the majority population ought to model their communities using ethnic immigrant enclaves as models. Without communities or a sense of community, Black businesses will have no primary consumer market for their products and services. Unlike neighborhoods left opened and abandoned, Black communities should be marked, closed, and monitored, just like Beverly Hills, Chinatown, Koreatown, or Little Mexico. Marking and closing a community signifies not only a sense of pride and security, but also connotes that it is valuable turf. Once closed, ethnic enclaves are culturally marked. For instance, ethnics may mark their turf by changing the names of buildings, erecting statues, or displaying signs and symbols that reflect their culture. In urban centers, in which Blacks have been the dominant population for centuries, major streets and buildings are still named after prominent slaveholders. Blacks rarely mark or close their territory, allowing access to interlopers who are able to disrespect and exploit the area. Before Blacks were able to move into white neighborhoods, they enjoyed some of the benefits of Black cohesiveness. They built and operated their own community-based business districts across the nation. Though Black business districts may have been smaller than white business districts, they provided a number of jobs, products, services, pride, and safe sanctuaries for Blacks. When the integration process began, many Blacks did not see the value of staying together as a group, pooling their resources and buying from their own businesses. Nor did they see the greater political and economic importance of having their own communities and business districts. So, they allowed those valuable foundations to be destroyed in the name of social integration and political correctness. They jumped on the bandwagon with white liberals who convinced them it was better to be in close physical proximity to whites than to each other. They chose to be politically correct and voluntarily destroyed the positive foundation of the Black communities that they had worked so hard to build for themselves after slavery. Today, it is amazing to see the opinion makers again pushing a politically correct view that proclaims that all classes of people are equal to Black Americans. And there is nothing special about how Blacks have been historically treated in this country. The reality of the matter is that, as a group, Blacks are locked onto the bottom rung of the social and economic ladder. They are scattered, and they are not like any other group. Blacks are a special people with an exceptional history. Black Americans need functional residential communities and business districts in which to gain and store wealth and political power. Strategies for community building are discussed in my book, Powernomics, the National Plan to Empower Black America.